All right, hello, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we've been doing a series of Bible decodes. This is number 121 of the Bible decodes in the Flavian signature. And this is all part of the Reciprocal Church unit, where we're trying to reconstruct a spiritual practices for each individual, and in the wake of the destruction of all of our cherished religions. And the Flavian signature has to do with the Flavian emperors of Caesars, Vespasian and his two sons Titus and Domitian, who were the Roman emperors from 69 to 96 AD. The Flavian hypothesis is that the Flavians, as part of a psychological operation, wartime propaganda against the Jews, they'd just gotten done or wrapping up fighting a 7-year-long war against the Jews. And they didn't want to have to keep fighting the Jews, because this has been going on for over a century. And so they proposed they knew that the Jews were waiting for a Messiah. The Messiah that the Jews were waiting for was a military leader that would help them overthrow the Roman Empire out of Judea. And so the Romans decided to write a story about a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack, turning the other cheek to oppression, and believing that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Judea, urging the Jews to forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do. And at the same time, overturning the temples of the money changers outside the temple, so that the Jews could no longer carry on their rituals, because the money changers were changing Roman money, which had graven images on it, to Jewish money, which didn't, so that they could offer it inside the temple. And so this was a direct hit on Jewish ritual. Same thing with overturning or disrupting the people that were out there selling doves and pigeons for the animal sacrifice. These are Jews again. So Jesus is very much pro-Roman and anti-Jew, just as if the Romans would have made him up as a psychological operation. And we're looking at this book from Michael Menescot's, M-E-N-A-S-G-O-T-Z, which is called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And I usually kind of explain where he's coming from and what's at stake, and give us some more background information. But he's kind of at the point in the book that we're at, he's about to kind of summarize a lot of his findings. So let's let him go, and I'll try to cut in if he mentions something that needs some clarification. Whilst in chapters 1 and 2, I describe Joseph Atwill's discovery that the book of Luke parodies the second half of Jewish War. Now, Jewish War is a book by so-called Josephus, very famous, considered one of the great classics of all-time literature, and especially in history. It's a history of this war, 66 to 73 AD, that both emperors Vespasian and Titus were both generals in that war, and were both injured in that war. That's part of their motivation for doing the gospel psyop. So they wrote the book, 7 volumes of Josephus's Jewish War, at the same time as a companion piece to the Gospels. In particular, here he's talking about the book of Luke, which Joseph Atwill, in his book Caesar's Messiah, covers what he calls the Flavian signature, which is 31 events. It's really more than 31, but just in the relevant part of the book of Luke, 31 consecutive events where Jesus, who has a 3-year ministry in Judea, according to the Gospels, and Titus, General Titus, who eventually becomes emperor, has a 3-year military campaign in Judea. And they absolutely mirror each other. Every place that Jesus goes, Titus goes, in the same order. And wherever they go, they participate in events that are typologically similar. Like, so doesn't mean that they're exactly the same, but they're of the same type. That was a big thing for the Romans, typology. Not just the Romans, even the Jews were participated in a lot of typology, especially the Pesher technique and other things that came into the Talmud. But so that gives you some of the background. This is really the Flavian signature. A lot of it is based on not only the method and the motives, but and the opportunity, but also based on the book of Luke in particular, but the Gospels as a whole, and really the whole New Testament for some scholars, and even sometimes the Old Testament for some. But this focuses on the book of Luke and the 7 volumes of the War of the Jews. And Menescot's dug in, and he found an almost unbelievable 250 parallels between the 2 books. That's over 10 per chapter in the book of Luke. And there's a bunch of them that are in order, where, you know, where Jesus goes, Titus goes. And they're offset by 40 years to the day. And whenever the dating is you know, unambiguous. And so that's what he's looking at. So then not only did he find these 250 parallels, but he plotted them on a graph with the book of Luke on the vertical axis and the War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. Every place he found a correspondence, he put a dot. And when he was done, he found that he had 5 near-perfect letters in Latin. Now, both the New Testament and Josephus are written in Greek. These are the 2 languages that the Romans use, and they are mostly unknown in Judea. So, there were some Jews that spoke Greek, but the Jews that spoke Greek were called Hellenized Jews, and they were mostly of the high elite. And that's just speaking it, that's not writing it. So that's another serious red flag against the idea that a bunch of semi-literate Palestinian or, you know, Judeans wrote the New Testament. Okay, so the story of the 7-year war rather than the previous century. My goal in this chapter was to show that the second half of Jewish War parodies Luke right back. So the parodies are mutual. One is parodying the other, but then the other parodies it back. So they were written by the same people at the same time for the same reason, particularly involving the story of Josephus, the supposed author of Jewish War. Clearly, neither of these mutual parodies can be asserted to be the result of a few additions made by later copyists after the 1st century, because in both cases the parody involves a core narrative spanning the whole of one story, parodying almost the entire narrative across the whole of the other story. So, what options remain for anyone wishing to argue against this evidence? If a critic were to say it's all coincidences, I can show that they are arranged in a meaningful and detailed pattern, the APTVS pattern of Latin letters, which shows that they are intentionally there, since each one had to be positioned carefully. If a critic were to say, okay, maybe both stories are parodying some earlier non-surviving document, I can show that even if such unsupported and bizarre claim were true, for someone to arrange those two sets of parallels so that they would form the APTVS pattern, it would still be necessary to have editorial control over both Luke and Jewish war, so this would still mean that Luke originates with the Roman government. If a critic were to say, okay, but maybe one story is parodying the other but not vice versa, I could respond by showing evidence that Luke parodies Jewish war. How Jesus' story clearly parodies that of Titus and Vespasian, not only at Lake Galilee, but across the full length of Luke. There are parallels with the entire second half of Jewish war. How a large number of these parallels are in much the same order in both documents. Evidence that Jewish war parodies Luke includes how Josephus' story clearly parodies Jesus' story in such incredible detail. The reverse parody, the many-to-one parallels in which one location in Luke is mirrored by multiple locations in Jewish war, all arranged to form the APTVS pattern, requiring editorial control of Jewish war and Luke. Other evidence that editorial control of both stories was required includes how the parallels are repeatedly designed to reveal new meaning in Jesus' story, another feat which requires editorial control of both stories. The way both Luke and Jewish war evoke each step in Exodus 12, which is the passage where the Passover lamb ritual is articulated. And so that's one of the main themes of the parallels, is Jesus as the Passover lamb, in a most grotesque manner, I might add. Yet, with the parallels in both stories arranged to form the APTVS pattern, which clearly necessitates editorial control of both Luke and Jewish war. If a critic said, okay, maybe there were a vast number of coincidental parallels, and you picked ones to form a pattern, either intentionally or otherwise, I could respond, one, by showing, as I will in the next chapter, that the number of coincidental parallels required for this scenario is so great that Luke, despite having only 1,151 verses, there's 250 parallels. So that's like one every 5 verses, less than one every 4.6 verses. So that's ridiculous. Only 1,151 verses would need to contain so many noteworthy but coincidental parallels with Jewish war and vice versa that this would fill about 4,000 verses, which is physically impossible. And by showing, as I will in the chapter, that if we look at those parallels compiled by independent researcher Cliff Carrington a decade ago, we see that even though he only found 25 parallels, which perhaps shows how well hidden they are, the large majority are in precise agreement with the APTVS pattern, to the point this would not reasonably happen by chance, and ditto those parallels discovered by Joseph Atwill. Summary of what this proves, having so conclusively proven that someone must have had editorial control over both stories, the story found in Luke and the story found in the second half of Jewish war, and the latter is unarguably, indeed explicitly, the product of the Roman government under Vespasian and Titus. This proves that the story of Jesus' life as found in the Gospel of Luke, originates from the Roman government under Vespasian and Titus, meaning it is Roman propaganda originating during their rule between 69 and 81 AD, and almost certainly during Vespasian's reign from 69 to 79 AD. Summary of why my explanation for this discovery is almost a plain logical deduction based on that discovery. This discovery allows the following logical deductions. Okay, just got to flip the page here. Okay, first logical deduction. From the mere fact that the Roman government went to such incredible lengths to leave evidence to ensure Jesus' story could later be proven to be fiction, we can deduce that belief in Jesus was not their ultimate goal. The only logical alternative is that their intention was to use Jesus' story as a stepping stone on the path to a different belief system, with the intention that belief in Jesus was to be undermined once that had been satisfactorily achieved. The hidden messages enable us to see that this intended belief system definitely involved worship of at least one Flavian emperor as God. Seemingly was originally Vespasian, albeit with the second and surviving edition of Jewish War shifting the emphasis more to Titus. Both of them were deified by the Roman Senate, by the way, so they both literally, legally, in the Roman Empire were gods. Now, one of the main typological themes between the two is not only do they have a parallel military campaign with the 3-year ministry of Jesus, but many prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled literally by Titus. So a lot of the things that Jesus says are going to happen and that Christians are waiting for them to happen right now, thinking that we're living through Revelation. The second coming of Jesus is Titus. If you read Josephus, you have it's very clear that the second coming of Jesus is Titus, because he fulfills all those prophecies, but he fulfills them just 40 years after they were made. Now, 2,000 years later, we're still waiting for them, but if we read Josephus, we would know that the second coming of Jesus is Titus, according to what scholars call one of the great histories ever written, even though it's almost absurd in almost as unbelievable as the New Testament itself in terms of supernatural stuff that happens and stuff that you end up saying God did it. Well, it wasn't God did it. It was the Romans did it. And this has profound implications that go way beyond what you would think, because so many people have known this over the last 2,000 years and have also written about it. And that when you really dig into actually which Romans did it, then you start to recognize that they wrote a lot of other stuff too. They had a series of pseudonyms that they used that can be revealed if you read the letters that they wrote amongst each other. And kind of you have to kind of piece together all the information. So you really need to be able to read Greek and Latin. I did take 3 years of Latin, but I'm not fluent in it as far as reading it. And but if you piece together all those letters, then you start to recognize that they wrote all of the church fathers, like Origen and Saint Ignatius and Tertullian and all of them, every one of them. And they wrote all of the Apocrypha also. And, according to Abelard Reuchlin, the guy who wrote the true authorship of the New Testament, he claims that the Piso family also wrote most of Aristotle's work, and the Septuagint, both of which are supposed to be from the 3rd and 4th century BC. Apparently somebody named Aristotle really lived, but he was a very minor author and wrote just a couple books, and they credited him with all the rest of his stuff. But then all the people in history who had also known this, including Shakespeare, who wasn't a man, and Emerson, Tolstoy, and Cervantes, and Milton, and Shelley, and Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis, and Marlowe, and they all wrote about it. And apparently every last one of William Shakespeare's plays is on the subject of the Romans who wrote the New Testament, including, of course, Romeo and Juliet. John Hudson has a book on that. It's called Shakespeare's Dark Lady. And Joseph Atwill also has a book called Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. And he looks at about 3 of the plays. Hudson looks at a few of the plays as well and shows Atwill says that he can decipher almost every passage in all 39 or 40 plays of Shakespeare's by using the cipher of understanding that it's about the Romans and the Jews. Every single play. So anyway, back to Menescots. And finally, what my presentation does not prove. I should end by saying that the idea of Jesus and the remarkably minimalist description of him offered in the Pauline literature appears to predate this project. I strongly disagree with this, but let's keep going. The Flavian government didn't invent the idea of Jesus Christ per se, but rather the vast majority of the details of his story. Given that the origin of the Gospels can now be proven to be the Roman government, it seems reasonable to speculate on whether the Pauline literature might originate as propaganda authorized by some earlier Roman emperor. As an example, Vespasian's predecessor, Emperor Nero, clearly would have hoped to deter Judea from continuing its push for independence from Rome, which would force him to authorize a hugely expensive military response. So for him, there was clearly value in promoting a more general message about a Jewish Messiah who promotes acceptance of Roman oppression. Now, both the authors Roman Piso and Abelard Reuchlin would strongly disagree with this, and really saying that this idea started with a committee that was called the Roman Committee to create a universal religion. And there were the couple of the Pisos were in it. Seneca the Younger was in it. Probably Pliny the Elder was in it. And Lucan and a couple other Roman intellectuals. And they, according to Piso especially, they pitched the idea to Nero, and Nero wasn't going for it. And so they tried to assassinate Nero, and they got caught, and Nero executed Seneca, who had been his original tutor, as well as one of the Piso brothers, and I think that's about it. I think they eventually did get Nero. They assassinated Nero about 3 years later. I'll happily accept that the way the Pauline literature is written would make most readers conclude that it surely couldn't come from the Roman government. But of course, that would be exactly the reaction that the Roman government propaganda team would aim for, since propaganda is only effective if the target audience is convinced that it isn't propaganda. Whilst the former Roman government origin for the Pauline literature, and thus Jesus Christ's story per se, would certainly explain why there is no physical evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ's existence whatsoever, I certainly do not claim proof of this. Now, what is he saying there? The Pauline literature is even more pro-Roman and anti-Jew than the Gospels is. Abelard Reuchlin claims that the Pauline literature was written primarily by Pliny the Younger, who was the younger foster brother of Arius Piso. These guys are all like intimates with the royal families. I mean, they're all, either vying to be emperor or were emperor or could have been emperor or whatever. And these are the only people that have ever corroborated the existence of Jesus. That's Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Trajan, and Suetonius. These guys two of them became emperor, and two of them were right at the doorstep of being emperor. And then there was Josephus, who was in the Flavian family, but probably didn't exist at all. So there's absolutely no evidence for the existence of Jesus in the first, prior to 150 AD, first and second centuries. There's no mention of him in the historical record. And that also includes the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's no mention of Jesus in the Dead Sea Scrolls either. So, there's exactly the same amount of evidence for Jesus as there is for Santa Claus. So, I have admiration for a lot of the Christian values and the Christian culture and what they've contributed to the extent that they have. And I'm not, harshing on the Christians per se. I feel like it's the best religion out there, but it's a fiction. It's proven right here. This is proof that it's fiction. That goes way beyond any Q drop or any dig that the people that are doing this, that are talking in these Christian terms, they need to dig on this. They haven't done their digging. Any of the digging that they've done has been within the Bible. Like they've already accepted that what's written in there is a true representation of the events. But it's not. It's a fictional story, and so is Josephus's War of the Jews. They neither one of them could have possibly been true when you see all of the correspondences. Okay, now he's about to get into another chapter here. We'll see if we can get through the first section. This chapter is called The Addition of the AP to form APTVS. Now, according to Menescot's here, War of the Jews was written kind of, the second half of it was written first, and the first half of it was written in a later period, possibly by a different emperor, because the Jewish war spanned 66 to 73 AD. But the first two or even three books go all the way back to like 60 BC or something. So, it's not till you get to the second half of it that you actually get to the time period of the Jewish war. So he could have written, or whoever Josephus is, could have written the second half of it first, and then whoever, somebody later, or Josephus or whoever, could have then written the prologue to the war itself. And that's where the AP of the APTVS pattern is going to be coming from. So the addition of the AP to form APTVS. In this chapter, I will show why the AP may be a later addition designed to modify an earlier message, and indeed the letters may have been added in sequence as a result of various editorial decisions, including just being V for Vespasian, then VS to make it clearer, then TVS to acknowledge Titus's importance, and finally APTVS. I will then discuss what it might mean and how this gives insights into what kind of God the Flavians intended to be worshipped as. Reasons to think the AP was added later. Oddly, the first half of Jewish War, corresponding to the left-hand side of the chart where the A and the P are, isn't actually about that war that the title relates to, and the parallels in this region give the impression of being added by someone who didn't have the option of editing Luke to help establish interesting and thematically coherent parodies. Like Luke, Jewish War was written in Koine Greek. I don't know how to pronounce that, but Koine, namely the common form of Greek in the period 300 BC to 300 AD. The introduction of Jewish War states that it is the second version, and that the original version, of which no copy survives, was written in the author's father tongue, but without saying what this father tongue was. It could be it was written by Vespasian, the father of Titus, who wrote the second part. But most scholars assume that he means Chaldee, which is a language that was originally Sumerian or in that area, and it was used by many Jews in the kind of east of in Asia. I guess the ones that were in Babylon and Persia. So it was written in the author's father tongue, but without saying what his father tongue was. The problem with this is that linguists agree that the second version shows none of the signs you would certainly expect if it were a translation from another language. It apparently claims to be a translation, and this seems to be a lie. If the original corresponded roughly to the second half of the surviving version, then it would be arranged to spell the letters VS, the signature of the father, Vespasian. This points to a solution to our conundrum, namely that this reference to a father tongue is a joke that only those in the senior rank of the secrecy cult would appreciate.